Here's how you can get better at Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, these are good overall deck building tips, getting better tips, and overall just strong fundamental advice for anybody returning to the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's no secret that the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Has and is constantly evolving. If you ever took a break and came back a few years later, you understand that the competitive world is completely different than it was when you left. So I'm making this video for any returning Yu-Gi-Oh! Players or simply someone looking to get better so that they can start playing the game more competitively. Now, these are the top 6 strategies and tactics you can start implementing to get better at the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And have helped me personally go from returning player to topping my local events and considering attending a YCS. So let's just jump right into it. Number 1, playing around hand traps. Now, hand traps have become the staple of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks regardless of archetype or playstyle, so understanding how to play around them is absolutely crucial. The top competitors have a strategy that works really well when going up against their opponent, baiting out the hand traps. You see, most upper echelon players understand the decks they may be going up against and know the crucial timing of their opponent's key plays as to give their hand traps the highest return on investment. If you're playing around hand traps, the best thing to do is to activate cards that are not your key plays first, so as to tempt your opponent into hand trapping preemptively at a suboptimal time so that you can activate your key plays and get a higher likelihood that they go through and just have a better overall chance of success with your turn. So, number 2 kind of ties into it, how to play through negates. Most decks are going to have one key objective, setting up as many negates and interruptions as possible so they can lock their opponent out of playing the game. This makes going second a daunting task, which is why you will need to know how to play through a big board with a lot of negates. The best way to do this is board wiping using cards like Lightning Storm, Raigeki, or Dark Hole. Now, since we can't always see these cards in our opening hands, we will need to know what moves to play using limited resources. This is why having smaller combos or strategies you can utilize when your main lines of play are locked out is super important. The key to this is to bait out as many negates as possible as early in your turn as possible so as to tap your opponent out of negates so that you can more easily go into your lines of play that could potentially break their board. Now, obviously this isn't always possible, especially when your opponent sees their full combo pieces in their opening hands and you had no hand traps to slow them down. It's still good to know how to play your deck using limited resources, which brings us to number 3, conserving resources. Now, this is a tactic that the major players utilize within Yu-Gi-Oh! As a way to have extra pieces to counterattack with. Now, if let's just say you were to spend all of your resources building a strong board and your opponent finds a way through it, you have nothing to counterattack with or respond with, making it very difficult or near impossible to recover. Now, this specific tactic of conserving resources is used in any good Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. The key element to this is to have a couple of options for win conditions in your deck by having a couple of potential boss monsters you can go into on any given turn with powerful abilities or high attack points. This makes your deck not only stronger, but gives you the opportunity to recover from having your board broken. So, number 4, understanding what lines to play in certain scenarios. A good Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck has multiple lines that you can play, whether going first, second, or against a particular type of deck. Now, obviously, we could sit and talk for days about what cards are best to play at certain times, what lines are most optimal for a specific matchup, but the key tactic is to really understand which lines of play you should make that are most optimal when going first or second, and or cards of yours that are best to have out earlier, and which ones that we should probably save for later. For an easy example, if you're going first, you don't want to play your boss monster that has great effects for when it's attacking. Instead, you would want to play your boss monster that is hard to take off of the field or has effects that interrupts your opponent's turn. Bonus points if both. The same applies to the inverse. If you're going second, you typically don't want to play your monsters that have strong effects on your opponent's turn, and instead you want to play your strongest attack point monsters or monsters that remove cards from your opponent's field. Now, understanding the most optimal lines of play within your deck will allow you to win more games and ultimately become a better player overall. Number 5, optimizing your deck to be as strong and consistent as possible. It's easy to get emotional with specific cards, especially if they've won you games in the past, but just because a card has won you a game doesn't mean it's most optimal for winning the match. A good example of this is Magical Cylinder. Sure, it's a cool card when the opportunity arises and your opponent least expects it, but the next game in that match, they will be expecting it and will be sure to remove it before attacking, rendering that card useless. This principle applies to a lot of other cards that people may like but aren't necessarily the best possible card to have in their deck. A fundamental deck building principle is to optimize your deck to getting your win condition cards as quickly and consistently as possible. If your deck is clogged down with cards you like but aren't necessarily optimal, it's harder to get the pieces together that bring out your win condition quicker, meaning your opponent who did optimize their deck will outpace yours in the first turn. Simply put, just because you like Blue Eyes White Dragon doesn't mean it belongs in your Dragon Link deck. Number 6. Understanding the decks you are going to be facing. While the current meta is the most diverse that we've seen in years, it's still good to understand the top decks and their mechanics, as well as their key combo pieces. When you know your opponent's deck, you will have an easier time playing against them. You will understand which cards are crucial to their deck's mechanic, allowing you to potentially stop them from getting out their best cards or simply just slowing them down. This allows you to activate your hand traps at crucial points to get the competitive edge on your opponent. Now, while knowing your opponent's deck isn't a foolproof method to winning every game, it doesn't hurt to know the decks you are potentially going to be going up against and building your deck list around them. This is why certain cards get really popular and get played in people's side decks. If a card in the top meta deck needs to be summoned from the graveyard, for example, you may want to have a card that can stop that from happening, such as Dimension Shifter in your side deck. The best way to do this is play with some of the top decks so that you can get a better understanding of what to expect when you play against them. Know your enemy inside and out. So that's it for today's video. If this helps you whatsoever, please just leave a subscribe on the video, a like on the video, and I will see you guys next week.